Hi, welcome back to my channel. My name is Rhonda Hensley, and I'm a licensed professional counselor, life coach, influencer, entrepreneur. I wear a lot of hats. I'm also a dog mom. I have children and a husband and a busy business. I want to talk about something today that just kind of been on my heart, and we all experience it. And I know that if you struggle with codependency, your life may be full of this emotion. It's called grief. Grief, oh man, we fight it. And it's, we acknowledge that, when someone dies, we're going to grieve. There are so many other things that cause grief in our life. Some of them we don't really realize what's going on. But, grief is not a linear, logical process. There's no finish line. There's no time date. Some grief may linger on for a long time. I don't think you're ever done with it, because there's times that grief comes back over the same issue. So I've been cleaning out some stuff in my garage and unpacking some stuff in my dining room that has very sentimental value to it. And there's some grief in that. Old pictures, old letters. There's also some good memories, but there's grief. I've put it off because I didn't want to feel the grief. I didn't want to feel the feelings, but I've embraced them, and it makes me a little heavy-hearted. I've gone through some very deep grief in my life, and the way I've described it is, it feels like I swallowed a piece of carpet and there's an elephant sitting on my chest. And that, for me, is what grief felt like. And I fought it. I didn't learn how to grieve. I pushed those feelings down. I didn't know there was a process. I didn't know to embrace grief. And that is what has to be done. The only way to the other side of grief is through. And so you have to embrace it. And it's not easy. I think that there's a lot of different things that cause grief. Me being very dependent on a person in my life, and when he didn't love me the way I wanted to be loved, or he didn't act the way I wanted him to act, I grieved. And I had the dream that we were going to grow old together, and that is not what happened either. I grieved, but I stuffed a lot of it down. And I got into recovery, and I started to delve into some of that past stuff. And I had to grieve. I had to grieve the losses of the innocence as an adolescent. I had to grieve the loss of a marriage of 25 years. I had to grieve the loss of, then 14 months later, my husband dying of a cancer. And even though we were divorced, the death of a dream, that's a hard one. Some of the things that cause grief that people maybe don't realize is, divorce in itself, there's a lot of grief. Infertility diagnosis, illness, disability, getting old. Man, there's some grief in that. Loss of health. Just so many different areas of grief. In personal development, grief comes when you let go of the defense mechanisms that have kept you safe. As they die, it's grief. For the recovering alcoholic or drug addict, they give up their best friend, and there's grief. So much grief. But the way to the other side is through. So I had to learn how to embrace my grief. There's a grieving process, and there's stages. We all have heard of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and her 5 stages of grief, which is denial. That's when, oh my God, is this thing really happening? You know, what do you mean I'm not going to be able to have kids because I'm infertile? What do you mean you want a divorce? You know, what do you mean I'm never going to walk again? It's denial. Oh my God, what's going to happen now? And then the next stage is anger. There's one of the things that I've learned in counseling is the people that are left after a suicide, their biggest feeling is anger. Anger toward that person because they didn't come to them. They didn't ask for help. They didn't. Or bargaining. If I'd have done this, then this wouldn't have happened. If I'd only known, or if I'd have picked up on the signs. There's a lot of bargaining in that grief. They get stuck there. And then depression or sadness. And these are all phases. And you will go back and forth. I can't believe this happened. I'm pissed off about this. If I only I'd have done this and that. And then just the sadness, the overwhelming sadness. It can be all-consuming. Sometimes, if there's a lot of grief, because a lot of different things happened quickly, a lot of deaths, or maybe in my experience, there was a lot of grief that stacked on top of each other during that time, you know, when my ex-husband died. And this is called piggyback grief. And if you do not process it and it's unresolved and it sits there, the next time something grievous happens, then all that piggyback grief comes up and it just stacks up and it stacks up. And sooner or later, the only thing you feel is the anger or the sadness. Grief is meant to be expressed. Good grief. Grief is good. As human beings, we are meant to grieve. We grieve a lot of things. In recovery, there's a lot of grief. The grief having to change. The grief of losing your character defects. The grief of maybe losing some people that, you know, in codependency, all these people that I had in my life, they disappeared because when I started setting boundaries, they didn't like it. And they left. They didn't want to be friends with me anymore. And it was grievous. I just remember it was real grievous. And I was in counseling at the time, and this counselor really encouraged me to grieve. And he gave me several, different mechanisms, support group for grief. He talked about me getting into a support group for grief, to write about it and journal about my feelings and my process. And there were some things that I did. You know, I stayed really close to friends and family that loved me and supported me. But one of the biggest things that he taught me was to, when I felt it coming up, to run a warm bath and to get in the bath and soak and embrace the grief and cry the tears until I was spent, and then to sit up, pull the plug on that water, and envision all of the grief and the tears that came out of my eyes draining down the tub and down the drain. And the ideal was for me to get in touch with how to process and how to embrace grief. It's not a happy sight. It's not, it's a messy process. But you know, grief is good. We as human beings need to grieve. In the process of recovery, there's grief. I think that, another thing that I really realize is today is getting older. I cannot do the things that I used to do. And I will get mad first. I'll get mad because I can't do this anymore. And then I'll think, well, if I'd taken better care of myself, and then I kind of go through some sadness until I get to the resolution of grief, and that's acceptance. Now, acceptance doesn't mean it's okay. Acceptance doesn't mean that it didn't happen. It just means that I accept it and I can move on. When I work with a client that has a lot of grief or trauma, I tell them, like on anniversaries, well, my dad died and it's his birthday and I'm really sad. I said, well, what was his favorite cake? Make that favorite cake and celebrate what you did have with your dad. Imprint something new over that memory. Imprint. I think that a lot of people talk about it takes a year to process the grief. You go through all the holidays, you go through their birthday, the day they died, the whole thing. But it begins to imprint new memories over that day to celebrate, to embrace. I try to remember, I got a big old birthday coming up and I'm going to celebrate it. I'm going to celebrate the things that only come from being my age. Wisdom, just kind of okay where I'm at. All those things that only come from being a woman that has some age. And grateful that I've lived this long. So, if you like what I share, please subscribe to my channel. I know this is not an easy topic for anyone to talk about or for anyone to go through. If you are going through grief, self-care, take care of yourself. Really get a lot of love from those people that love you and nurture yourself. Please subscribe to my channel and hit like, share what I share here on here. It's about codependency, a recovery, and all the things that go with that. And grief is one of those things. So I hope you have a good week, and remember to be you on purpose.